This is a quick lesson on rounding decimals. In 5th grade, we round decimals usually to the tenths or hundredths place. So it's going to look like what you did last year, except now we may have numbers going out to the thousandths. So when you think about rounding, if I have 1.12 here and 1.13 here and 9, 10. Pretend those are even. So when you have a number line and it's showing a whole a number like 1 and 12 hundredths, this would be here 1 and 121 thousandths. Then 1 and 122 thousandths, 1 and 123 thousandths, and so on until you get to 1 and 13 hundredths. So when we're rounding, you always have to remember, here's 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. So this midpoint, 1 and 125 thousandths, is what determines if you're rounding up or down. So if your number falls here in this first section, you're going to go back down to 1 and 12 hundredths. If it's at the midpoint or any other of these numbers, you're going to round it up. And there's some tricks you can do to help yourself keep from rounding to the wrong place value spot. So if I see a question and it says round to the nearest tenth, they're going to give you a number. It could be out to the hundredths or the thousandths. You just have to focus on what you're rounding it to. So if I'm rounding to the nearest tenth, I'm going to underline the tenths place and circle the digit to the right. So I usually teach this with a way they called Cinderella rounding. So the place value spot you underline is Cinderella. She's the most important character. And then the one to the right is Fairy Godmother. And Fairy Godmother gets to determine if she goes to the ball. So she goes to Fairy Godmother and says, please, 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 can I go to the ball? And if Fairy Godmother is 5 or up, she gets to dress up. If she's 4 or below, she doesn't get to go. So because Fairy Godmother is an 8, she's going to get to dress up into a beautiful 8. You always change Cinderella one number higher if you're rounding up. If she doesn't get to go, it just stays the same. All these numbers turn to 0 after Cinderella, and your rounded number is 3 and 8/10. Let me show you another one. So if I have this number and I'm rounding to the nearest tenths place, Cinderella is in the tenths place. I underline the 7. Circle Fairy Godmother. Fairy Godmother is a 2, so she's not having a good day. She says no. So if Fairy Godmother says no, she disappears, and Cinderella stays a boring old 7. Everything Fairy Godmother are after going this way all turn to 0s and fall away, and then you're just left with 1 and 7/10. If I have this section, I'm going to put round to the nearest hundredth, right? 100 THS. If I have a number like 4 and 125 thousandths. If I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth, I'm going to underline the digit in the hundredths place. Fairy godmother is always to her right. And remember, if she's 5 or up, you get to dress her up. So fairy godmother's a 5, so she's having a good day. And she says, yes, you get to go. And the 2 gets to be a beautiful 3. And this number rounds to 4 and 13 hundredths. I'll do one more as an example. So this number here, 7 and 364 thousandths, if I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth, I'm going to underline the hundredth. Fairy godmother's always to her right, but today she's a 4. If it's 4 or below, she doesn't go. So fairy godmother's not having a good day. She says, no, you can't go. So she has to stay a boring old 6. And the number is 7 and 36 hundredths. There's one other situation that you have to be careful for. And these are the tricky ones. If I have this number here and I'm rounding to the tenths, I'm going to underline the tenths and circle fairy godmother. Fairy godmother's having a good day. She says, yes, I get to dress up. Well, now we have a problem because I can't put a 10 in the tenths place. So when this happens, when Cinderella is a 9, you have to cross her out and make her a 0 and cross out the next place value spot to the left and make this one 1 higher because we're adding 1 to the ones place. And all these go away. I could also just round it to 2. Sometimes they keep the decimals, sometimes they don't. So anytime you're rounding, say I'm rounding this to the hundredths place, I go to the right, I get to go. Fairy godmother says, yes, I'm going to round up. If it's 5 or up, you get to dress her up. But I can't put a 10 in that spot. I have to change 2 spots. This becomes a 0 and this becomes a 1. And my rounded number is 2 and 1/10. Hope that helps.